Okay, so I would like to welcome everybody back to our third night about things you got to know when you're coming out later in life. And this part is really one of the things that affects most people when they're coming out later in life. And that is divorce. As I said last night, a lot of times I start with people the people come to see me because they're questioning their sexuality or think I may not be straight, but then as time goes on, they realize that they may not be able to stay in their marriages any longer, and they often have to move towards divorce. As I said, this is an educational and support program. I do believe in the power of the universe, and there's a reason why you're here tonight. And both Barb and I were where you guys were when we came out in 2016 and 17. And as you all know, I've been doing this work for 2000 since 2018. These are some of my clients that I've had over the years and some of the retreats I've had over the years. This is my wife, the one next to me in the sunglasses. Her name is Tanda McKay, and she's a photographer here in Nashville. And there's some testimonials, and I have a lot of testimonials on my website if you want to see that. I like that picture of us. That's the night of our rehearsal dinner. And That's our puppy. Isn't he cute? He's so sweet. That's my personally. This is me professionally, which I've talked about already. And this is Barb personally. And this is Barb professionally, which we've talked about already. And we talked a little bit about our homework. Those are great questions to start with if you haven't had to take a look at them yet. And so tonight's topic is rethinking divorce. And we will have some time to discuss this at the end, because I find that divorce is a very challenging subject for a lot of people, especially those of us who who have grown up in places where divorce is something that was verboten. You know, you weren't supposed to do that. And so I would love for you to ask yourself over the next couple of minutes as I go through this, and I will come back to this slide when we're done so that we can have a conversation. What were you conditioned to believe about marriage? What were you conditioned to believe about divorce? And what were you conditioned to believe about divorce and children? And what does heteronormative culture say about marriage, divorce, and divorcing kids? So, heteronormative culture typically says that marriage is supposed to last forever. You find your person when you're in your teens, 20s, or 30s, you marry them, and you get points for the longer you stay together. And I always use this example. You know, when you go to a wedding and they do this, the couples dance where all the couples get on the floor and they do this, well, you know, if you've been married 5 years, sit down, 10 years, sit down. And then there's that last couple standing dancing. They've always been married 50 plus years. And people start clapping wildly. And, you know, they hate each other, you know, but they've been married the longest. But, you know, we're going to cheer them on. And there's no points, by the way, no brownie points at the end if you stay married and for a long time and you're not happy. Um, Heteronormative culture, it comes from our religious roots as a country. Divorce is bad and divorce is wrong. You don't do it. And if you've done it, you have somehow failed, which is such a complete fallacy. And of course, many of us, many of us have heard about how difficult divorce is for children. So there are three main stages of adulthood. We have our early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. So some define the four stages of adulthood by breaking up middle adulthood into early middle age and late middle age. And the reason why I bring this up is this is not a midlife crisis. A lot of times people, when they start questioning, and usually the women I work with are between 30 and 60, usually when they start questioning, they think, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I I'm having some sort of midlife crisis. I don't want to be married anymore. Like, what's wrong with me? But what I want to tell everyone, it is so normal to be questioning when you hit midlife, no matter what age midlife is for us, because it is part, as I said, it is part of the developmental stages of an adult. Just because we hit 21 doesn't mean we stop growing. And so, one of the things that happens is that as we go through life, we have other stages. So, for example, midlife, it's the time to question what you were told to be and decide what you're told to be. Does that fit who you were created to be? And then at some point, you may say, well, I like this about myself. I like that about myself. And so I'm going to keep that part of myself because that feels true to me. But this part, and this part doesn't feel so good to me. And I was told that I was supposed to do this, but it doesn't feel like a good fit for me. So changing your life midlife isn't a crisis, though it may feel or seem like one. Um, it's really hard for people to wake up to the knowledge that the life you're living is not exactly the one that we want. And it's often really scary to be acknowledged that we aren't happy or that we spent years, I wouldn't say deceiving ourselves. For me, it was more of an acknowledgement. Like I knew for a long time that I wasn't straight, but I refused to acknowledge the fact that I wasn't straight. And so a lot of times there's a lot of things going on. There's anxiety, there's panic, there's sadness, there's anger, and there's a lot of grief. And there's also cognitive dissonance, which I talked about last time, and questioning and uncertainty. So many things can prompt midlife evaluation. So it seems like, as I said, it comes out of the nowhere, but usually there are so many things that trigger up for us to go on the journey. And remember when Barb talked about a catalyst being a human being? So, like, some of us have had catalysts, like female catalysts in this group, this, a journey of discovery, but some of us haven't, but we may have experienced one of these things. Um, it's a person or an event. So for example, I have had clients that have had major health issues where they've thought they were going to die and they came back from it and they're like, I've got to change my life. I have had clients that have just gotten divorced. A lot of people get divorced and then discover this. I have had clients that often when their mom or their dad dies, that's when they decide to come out. Sometimes it is, as I said, it's a human being. Sometimes things happen with their children. Their children gets majorly sick, or God forbid, their child dies, and they just do a total reevaluation of their life. Um, so some of the big changes that can happen in midlife are all of these. And I look at that and let me look. The only thing I haven't done is adopt a child. I actually learned how to play pickleball. I have my gender identity is still the same, but those are the only two things I haven't done in the last 10 years. And so I bet you all could take a look at this list and say, yeah, I've done that one, I've done that one, I've done that one. Um, so we have a right, and it is also perfectly appropriate to reevaluate your marriage and possibly consider divorce. Um, it's normal. It is so normal to think about your marriage and decide whether you want to be married still to that person or if you want something different. Um, and there is nothing wrong with thinking about it, asking questions about it, talking to people about it. Because a lot of times we feel such shame and guilt around divorce. We often start to go back into a trauma response of isolation, and we really don't talk about it to anybody. Um, and then the other big factor is like children and divorce. People get very, very concerned about their kids and what's going to happen to them if they get divorced. Um, Divorce actually can benefit kids if you approach it with yours and their best interests of them in mind. So, like, you ever hear somebody say, "Oh, I've got to stay for the kids." Well, I always say, well, what are you teaching your kids when you stay in a place where you're not happy? You're teaching your children to stay in a place that is not happy. If you are in an abusive marriage, whether it is no matter what type of abuse, if one parent is more abusive to the other, you teach your children that they should take abuse. But if you remove them from a toxic environment, it's really beneficial for them because they realize that they don't have to stay in places that um, that are uncomfortable or not safe. Um, Oftentimes, when parents get divorced, they establish new homes, and this is if both parents remained in the children's lives. And sometimes that doesn't happen because someone just, no longer remains, and that is a real heartbreaking thing. But it's also the responsibility of the parent that leaves and not your responsibility because you got a divorce. A lot of times kids live in houses full of tension. I remember my childhood home was filled with tension, and I really wanted my parents to get divorced. It didn't happen. But my dad was an alcoholic and he drank a lot. And I just really wanted to live somewhere where I didn't have to worry about my dad being drunk all the time. So, uh, a lot of times kids often pray for it quietly to themselves. Um, it also makes children more resilient and adaptable. They often develop coping strategies, and I honestly have seen this in my own family. My three older children were 20 plus when I got divorced, and my youngest was 13. And I find that my youngest child is much more resilient about the divorce, about their relationship with me and their relationship with me, the relationship with their dad. He's very loving to both of us. He does not have the same baggage that my older children have. And so I have found that kids that go through divorce, at least with this child, who also, by the way, had his own therapist going through this, so he had a safe person to talk to. Um, they seem to be able to navigate things, and he does. He is definitely more resilient than his siblings. Um, so the kids often develop coping strategies because they have to, because of the divorce. They also experience empathy because um, it makes some children of divorced parents more sympathetic to the problems of others. So children of divorce often can relate, have more empathy, and also more self-sufficiency because they are often living between two homes, and learning how to be a little bit more self-sufficient is often good for kids. And what I love about most, when a divorced parent models to the children they deserve to be in a safe, satisfying, supportive relationship, they are not they're showing their children not to settle for an unhealthy or unhappy marriage. After a divorce, eventually divorced parents begin new relationships, and so kids witness their parents being happy on their own or finding a better partner, and this provides excellent modeling opportunities for the children. You know, the study that came out that talked about how horrible divorce is for children, that came out in like the 1970s. It was commissioned by a very conservative religious organization. So it was definitely skewed in the views of that church. And so there's a lot more things that can happen with children when their parents get divorced. And I'm not going to read all of those. If you want to go back and read them later when we put up the video, um, that would be great. So we do have homework in pages 21 and 22. And in it, we ask you to maybe rethink your ideas about what divorce is. So I'm going to